What's up, guys? We titled this episode today, Don't Comment on What You Don't Understand. And what I don't understand is why we called this podcast that. To answer this question, I am bringing in my good friend, Jill McMahon. She is a grief specialist. She's a suicidologist.
That's what I
And
love.
she's just an all-around great person. Every Thursday, you and I get together for a little something we call Guns and Grief.
We do.
And when you sent me this title, you said, "Don't comment on what you don't understand." I was like, first up, I love the title, but I really don't understand why you want to call the podcast this.
Well, let me tell you what it's about, my
Okay.
friend.
Thank you.
Too often in my work, I have noticed that individuals want to comment on how somebody else is grieving based off of how they're outwardly grieving at the neighborhood potluck or specifically in media. And I saw this great quote earlier this week in an interview with Harry Styles by Zane Lowe. And Harry was speaking about the loss of his band member. And it really struck me with people don't even understand what's happening behind the surface in somebody else's heart and their mind, yet they want to comment on how well they are or are not grieving.
All right. Well, let's play this. I grabbed the clip, and this is an interview with Harry Styles and Zane Lowe, and then a grief specialist, somebody that you follow on Instagram, David Kessler, is the one that posted this. So it's about a minute long. Let's all watch it together.
I mean, full transparency, it's like something that even the idea of talking about it, feel like I struggle with that a little bit even. I think there was a period when he passed away where I really struggled with kind of like acknowledging how strange it is to have people kind of like own part of your grief in a way. I have such strong feelings around my friend passing away, and then suddenly being like aware of there's maybe like a desire from other people of you to convey that in some way, or it means you're not feeling what you're feeling or something.
Interesting. And I'm sure as a grief specialist, you've seen this 100 times. Before we jump into more of our content, I just want to welcome people to Air Check Your Life. This is our podcast, and every day of the week, it's a little something different. And, we do that here because every day of the week, I'm feeling a little something different. Yes, I love to talk about the 3 questions that I believe you can use to assess and change your life, but I'm also really interested in grief. I'm very interested in what Dr. Dave has to say about metacognition. I'm very interested in how our body can talk to us, which is why we bring on Dr. Anna Marie Frank. And of course, I'm very interested in the mystical world that Courtney McDermott lives in, and she just feels like a wealth of information. So every day is a little different. And today it's about guns and grief. So Jill, you watched that interview, and the first time you saw it, what was your takeaway? What was the thing that you were thinking, and why did you immediately text me and say, this is what we're talking about this week?
I did immediately text you, and thank you for that question. It struck a nerve with me. I have to be really honest, and that's because I am fortunate enough to sit in the chair that I get to sit in and walk down the journey of grief with so many individuals. And I have heard this scenario over and over again. And to see somebody, a public figure like Harry Styles, maybe not even know that he was calling out such a common response to grief, I just really felt like I wanted to bring this to people's attention. I will say as well, my friend, I have not checked in with you this week. I know that you lost your uncle this week because I'm tuning in. And so I tuned in on Monday and I found out that he had passed away. You and I had chatted last week that he was in hospice. And in some ways, you are also beautifully grieving in public. But not all public grieving looks like yours. And I think it's important for people to start to check themselves and check their reaction to others in some of the most confusing emotions that we can ever experience as humans. And that's the emotions tied around grief. But man, are we really quick? When Harry said how strange to have other people owning a part of my grief. And you and me, Matthew and Jill, I mean, can you think of instances where you have possibly done that in stories of people's lives that you've never met before? But of their loss, right?
For sure. For sure. You know what immediately came to me, and you and I have said this 100 times, like grief isn't always somebody dying. And I remember when I made the decision to walk away from my radio and television career 4.5 years ago. And boy, you can bet, Jill, there were a lot of opinions about me walking away from that career. And there's still moments where I grieve the loss of that career, but very differently. Now, if you're asking me about the grief in terms of death, I think in some weird way, I was thinking about this last night, in some weird way, because I've experienced grief so personally over the years, that I don't want to say I'm getting better at it, but I'm getting better at using the tools that I know I need to get through the grief. And that is something that, only comes if you have the opportunity to face off against that from time to time. And I thought about you last night because I wondered how Jill would feel about that statement. Like, do we ever really get better at grief, or do we just get better at using the tools that we know are going to help us get through grief?
Both.
Okay.
But I'm going to say that in situations like yours, as you just stated, as I've been faced with it, I take pride in knowing that I'm getting better at how I respond to it. Here's the difference between you and others that may hear our conversation today. You took the time to develop the awareness.
Without
my
question.
friend, until each and every one of us. That is why this conversation is such a hot button issue for me, because I have sat on the other side with somebody in incredible psychological pain and listened to stories of how they have been judged for how they did or did not react to their pain. And I sit there and go, wow, how many times have I done that? That's awareness. I'm asking myself, have I done that? Was I judging Aunt Martha when I feel like she put her dog down too soon and that dog was still eating and was still running circles around, the neighborhood rabbits? Like, was I passing judgment? And I didn't understand, was I passing judgment on how somebody else handled their parent that was aging and ill? And maybe I thought that they should have gotten help for that parent sooner. That's also grieving. We've talked about anticipatory grief last week.
Yeah.
That can be grieving things that are still in existence or grieving things that we know are coming in the future. But so many of us, it was a trick question earlier when I asked you, have you found yourself possibly judging or commenting on somebody else's grief? It was a trick question. I'm going to tell you that.
I have. What came to me is you and I have been.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was thinking about this as soon as you mentioned that. I thought, well, let me own my shit. I remember deeply judging my mom after my dad died. Deeply, because she just seemed to want to move on so quickly. It was like within a week, she had cleaned out the closet. Within 2 weeks, she had gotten rid of all these things. Within a month, it was like, was he ever in the life? Right.
Yeah.
And I remember deeply judging and becoming angry about it and just feeling like, God, I would never go that quickly, or I would never do this. But that's kind of where we get ourselves into trouble, is that when we say, I would never do that.
Yes. Let's pause with the I would never, my friend.
Right.
You made it about I, and you stopped making it about they, them, or you.
Yeah.
And so, that was your mom's journey. Yes, you were also experiencing a loss. That's where it gets a little muddy sometimes, right? When a family is experiencing the same loss, but they have different responses to it. Your mom's journey was to clean out the closet, create space, try not to see the things that caused her pain. And maybe seeing those things didn't bring her comfort where you thought, I would never, because those things would bring me comfort. Why would I want to erase him so quickly? Do you see the judgment from that angle? I mean, thank you for using that as an example, because that was really vulnerable, but so common, honestly.
Yeah, I feel like I'll pray on this later, but I owe my mom an apology.
Then we've had a good conversation today.
Yeah, right. Today's a good conversation, because that is a good thing for me to recognize. And look, I as you mentioned, I just lost my uncle this week, and I can almost assure, like, his wife is going to do it differently than his kids are going to do it, than his brothers and sisters are going to do it, than his friends are going to do it. And if I'm hearing my friend Jill today, it's just do what you need to do and don't worry about how they're doing it.
Exactly. When you experience a loss that is personal, yes. Now, what you and I just said is a lot easier said than done, right? Just stay in your lane. Just process how you would like to process, and don't tell anybody else how they would want to process. But here's an easy way to start practicing that, Matthew. I want all of us, when we're watching the news, and when we hear of a horrible incident that's happened in the media, from all of us that are in Arizona, we count drowning deaths here in the Valley, much like in Colorado, they count skiing deaths, right? That's just, we unfortunately have a ticker. But it's not all that uncommon in the spring and summer to unfortunately hear about a child drowning fatality. And so, as an example, if you're watching one of those, I'm going to ask you not to immediately go into what did they do wrong? What was insecure? How did they make it easy for that child to get into the pool? We go instantly from tragedy to blame, or actually tragedy to assumption. And so when I asked you yesterday to title this, "Don't Comment on What You Don't Understand," I will tell you, in my work, in my thousands of individuals that I have sat alongside of while they're grieving, people on the outside, you understand about 10% of what's really occurring, about what really has occurred. So if you want to be better at being more understanding and staying in your lane and not creating judgment, I want you to start with the media. So many of us in this last 45 days or however long it's been have been inundated with news about Nancy Guthrie being missing. And we have a public figure and her family who is hurting immensely in the public's eye. And so many of us at dinner parties or on our Zoom calls are talking about it, and some are making judgments. That's where you start to build that muscle, and that's where you start to practice, and you go, why am I doing that? Ask yourself the question, why do I feel the need to create all of the answers around this tragedy? What do you think that's about? As I say that, what are you thinking?
Well, I'm looking for this this note that I typed forever ago, because I did some research on here. Let me see if I can find this really quick, because it's completely relevant to what we are talking about. And I read this article, and basically, I'm not going to find it in time. Oh wait, shit, there it was. I read this article one time, and the article was called "Why Do We Hate?" And I'll paraphrase this whole article, but basically science has found that people form stronger bonds when they're able to talk about their dislike towards someone else rather than when they have positive feelings towards someone.
Wow.
And it feels to me like this is that. It is. Look, death is not a positive experience for most people. It's a pretty negative experience. And so when we're around that negative, let's just call it energy, it's easier to hate on people than it is to love on people in these instances. And that's just science talking. So worth mentioning, right? Like, and the reason it's worth mentioning is because I'm telling you right now, in your left earbud and your right earbud, your tendency is going to be to go there. And if you've been listening to Dr. Dave and I over the last 3 weeks, we've been talking about metacognition. I'm asking you to shift yourself into what he's going to be talking about next week, which is quadrant 4, high awareness, high control. I'm aware that this is going to be a tendency, but I'm also aware that I have the ability to control what comes out of my mouth.
And the way that our brain thinks. I love following the work that you and Dave are doing in educating us about how our thought processes occur.
Me too. It's fascinating.
It's fascinating, and it's applicable almost anywhere. Yeah. It's applicable here, right? So I love that quote that you just read to us, but I'm going to add something additional to that.
Please.
I think that the human brain, when it is forced with a scenario, likes to create a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Sure.
That makes sense. So often in these tragic stories that we are hearing, we know the beginning and the end, but we don't know the middle, right? There wasn't a video camera there. There weren't cameras staged in the home. There wasn't somebody voice recording. We don't know what really happened in those last few moments or hours. So our brain, as we've talked about week after week after week, does not like to be uncomfortable. It does not like dis-ease. So it creates a story. It creates a narrative. And I'm going to tell you again, please trust me, your narrative is wrong 90% of the time. So when it's interesting, my family knows that I have this, the bane of my existence is when I see a horrible loss on the news, and on the 5 o'clock news, we have a newscaster at the door of the family that's just experienced a tragedy. And they're sticking that microphone in the face of the mom who just lost her child in a wrong way car accident. And they're asking her to make a comment. And then individuals that are watching that judge her response. This is what I want people to know, that often we are judging others' grief numbing. So grief numbing occurs as a protective factor from the brain when we're experiencing intense overwhelm or shock from grief. So how it shows up, if I'm asking you guys to start exercising or using this muscle as we're watching these stories unfold in the media or in front of us, I want you to realize that the individuals you're watching are usually in shock if their story is being featured in the media, right? They're experiencing immense pain, and the brain is trying to protect it. As you and I know, my friend, because I know my favorite phrase, which I've shared with you, which I know is one of your favorite phrases, is the brain believes what you tell it. In those moments of immense shock and grief, your brain is telling you that you're in danger. So in order to protect you, it shuts down and it creates this sense of detachment or disbelief. So when we're watching those individuals on the 5 o'clock news and they're not crying, but we're judging them for not crying, they're not wailing, they're not angry, but they almost look like a robot, their brain is detaching them from reality. It's buffering against intense pain to allow the brain to process loss in manageable doses. So I just added a lot there, but that is how I see those moments, because I've worked in this space quite a bit and because I understand how the brain processes. But then I watch my peers around me be so quick to comment and judge. And what I know to be true is that when you do that, you are causing that individual additional pain and grief. And now you've created an environment that is not safe for a griever.
Way to go, buddy. Way to go. You did that. Well, thanks, Jill. I appreciate it. Bulletproof is the book that she has written. It's just incredible. If you scan that QR code up in the top right, you will be able to listen to the book or read the book. You've done the audio version, right?
I have. It's fun.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. So that's all out there, and it's available. Tomorrow is Friday, and I have to be honest with my audience. I'm about a 50-50 right now on there being a show. I don't have a guest booked. And as you pointed out, I've had kind of a week. And Saturday morning, I'm delivering a keynote address for the American Case Manager Association of Arizona. And so I've got a little bit of fine tuning and travel. And so don't be shocked if the next time we link up is on Monday with Dr. Anna Marie Frank. But have a look at what Jill's got. And I feel like what you and I are doing should be required listening. So thank you so much for week in and week out, just bringing the goods. I really appreciate you.
I love you, and I love your willingness to have these conversations. And I'm thinking of you this week, my friend.
Thank you so very much. To everybody else who's here, we love you too. And we'll see you on next time here on our podcast. Have a great day.
Bye, guys.